Deciphering the next 2 years of bear. Yeah, that's a little bit clickbaity. However, I do think today's episode is going to live up to the billing. So for anybody who's joining live, I think you're in for a treat. We're going to have a pretty fun, structured episode. And for anybody who's listening afterwards, not live, you'll still get a lot of value out of it. Encourage you to certainly take part in the MVHQ community and join live. That's always great. You could always ask questions, interact, those kinds of things, make fun of us in the background, all options. But even if you're listening afterwards, I think you're also going to get a ton of value out of this, which is really great. So a couple housekeeping points before we dive in. Just for those not as familiar, we're on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. So, please feel free to catch all episodes you've missed there, string them together for a holistic picture. Do continue to want feedback or thoughts. So we take both a formal and informal approach to this. So informally, anybody ever listens, both live and afterwards recorded, also, we have a forum that typically floats around. That's for anybody listening live, is in the office hours chat. It's more of like a survey. It only takes a couple minutes, but that way we can get really good product feedback in what we're doing and just continue to improve and make sure it's valuable for everybody. Lastly, the application to be a guest on Numbers Therapy is out there as well. We provide allow lists to both the guest and the referrer. So if you have anybody who you think would be good to be on, topic that you want them to talk about that would be of interest, or it's yourself, feel free to submit there too. So for framing purposes, purpose of Numbers Therapy, of course, is to talk through the macro and oftentimes showcase our in-house MVHQ experts as well. And as mentioned in the last couple of times, we're going to start to evolve and expand outside the MVHQ community only. So we'll have a nice mix of MVHQ guests and external guests as well. For our audience, right, the goals are the same. Ensure everyone understands how all of the big pieces fit together, help everyone make better decisions with NFTs and other investments using a balanced perspective, learn about different areas and opportunities that exist out there as well and different ways of thinking, and, as mentioned, showcase some of our people in MVHQ as well. Also, as a reminder, and as I always say, for the people listening live and afterwards, there's different experience levels and backgrounds that are in here, right? So if you have any questions, be it medium, advanced, or even more basic, please feel free to drop it in. There's probably other people with the exact same question you have, even if it's a definition, an acronym, please drop it in. We'll make sure we get it answered. Want to make sure everyone's along for the full ride. Lastly, important note and disclaimer that none of what you hear in here is financial advice. It's all opinions. So, without further ado, and onto today's guest and episode. Today's guest is a super interesting guy who I feel is going to be able to shed some additional perspective on several elements of the Web3 world and beyond. In addition to having his own pretty strong economic philosophies, he catalyzed this belief into heavily directed interest to become an expert in a pre-metaverse, a precursor to many of our metaverses we analyze now. More on that soon. And has also spent time within the rare assets industry, in addition to having witnessed the recession from the private banking world, and even got to dip his toe in a bit on the regulatory side to form an opinion there too. In the current state of the economy in Web3, we all probably have a lot of outstanding questions of how to plan, what actions to take. And this guest will fall right in line with the Numbers Therapy ethos. So he may even be able to shed some color on the status of Middle Eastern Web3 world, hailing from Jerusalem. Very happy to have him as a colleague and a sparring partner. Please welcome Dylan Shub to the stage, everyone. Dylan, how are you doing today?
GM, doing well, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. I'm excited. I don't have my, I think, chamomile or other tea in front, but I do have my yerba mate, so I have a little bit of caffeine going in the system. It's Thursday. It's a week before holidays. Things are very good. Really excited for the discussion today too, man. Okay, so let's start first things first, where we typically start with pre-Web3 background. Can you maybe talk about where you started your quote-unquote business life and how that evolved over time?
Sure. So I had quite a weird history. I'd moved from South Africa when I was 17 to Toronto. And at the time, the family was relatively religious. In South Africa, the family had been involved in real estate, and my cousins were involved in quite a large retail empire. And so I finished school at a yeshiva in Toronto and then proceeded to do a Bachelor of Talmudic Law, which culminated in me taking a break year to Jerusalem for a year and a half, and I never left. And after kind of having finished the Bachelor in Talmudic Law, I was kind of itching to get into the workforce and not kind of go and do another degree as well. So I had to turn down a scholarship to Schulich, which is a business school in Toronto, and proceeded to kind of use contacts to get into the private banking world. And my break happened actually in 2009 because I had, during my years in yeshiva, I'd kind of gone as an escape to the American Colony Hotel, which turned out to be this hotspot for Middle Eastern politics, and befriended a number of important Palestinian families. And so when Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, was running for his first elections, he was running on a pillar of economic peace. In other words, bypass all of the solving the actual land disputes. Let's get business going on. And so what ended up happening was I decided to have the first family office conference in Israel and got him to be the keynote speaker. And then just so happened that the night before, the president had given him the mandate to form his government. And so there I was, this wunderkind at 20-something, introducing the next prime minister. CNN, everyone arrived. And so after that, I was basically able to launch a private consulting that focused on opening offshore bank accounts for people. And so there I found myself very much in 2009, flying all the time back to Manhattan and Switzerland, opening private bank accounts.
Very interesting. So just a standard opening background and standard entry into it as well. It's very, very cool to hear. It sounds like, though, so first off, what's interesting, right, is that started in 2009, right? So we're obviously going to be able to touch on that today about 2008 recession and kind of how that followed on, parallels to today. We'll definitely touch on that. But you also didn't stay within that kind of consulting family office or a private banking space either, right? That evolved over time. So, where did that go to afterwards? Where did you find yourself spending time beyond the private banking world?
Yeah, so it was this weird situation because the way my structure was set up was I was an independent private bank. And what that really means is instead of me kind of putting together an asset management team and so on, I was basically getting, all my clients knew I was getting a kickback from the banks, right? So all the banks were giving me 30%, right? It didn't matter which bank the client went to. And so basically I was able to meet with clients in Switzerland or Manhattan or Singapore, open accounts for them. I would take them to 6 or 7 meetings. They could then pick the bank they liked, and they knew that I was doing oversight for them. And what suddenly started happening was that all the banks were closing their doors. They basically all started saying some point in time in mid 2009, look, if these are American, Canadian, UK, Australian clients, we're not quite sure what to do right now compliance wise. And I'm like, okay, so when will you know? They're like, talk to us in 9 months. I'm like, 9 months? What am I supposed to do for 9 months? And they're like, I don't know. Do you know any Russian clients or Arab clients? And this was getting ridiculous. So I started looking what else to do. And similarly, of course, the whole trust world was changing as well, right? I'd been getting a lot of work with trust and estate lawyers and accountants. And again, no one was opening offshore trust because all these jurisdictions like Bahamas, Caymans, and so on did not want to be in violation of, get what's called gray listed, right? America has a list of statuses for different offshore jurisdictions, and no one wanted to be gray listed. They all wanted to be in compliance. But similarly, like we're finding now with crypto, there were no guidelines. And so they didn't want to get punitive, situations happening afterwards. So I pivoted to fine art consulting. My family had always been interested in art, and I'd been attending auctions since the age of 9. So to me, it was just a comfortable secondary asset class. And a lot of my high net worth clients who were opening bank accounts also were collectors or had art portfolios. And I ended up often having to work with Sotheby's, Christie's, and Bonham. So I made that pivot.
Very, very interesting. Okay. Very, very cool transition. Makes a lot of sense, of course, the way that you're laying it out. For anybody listening now or listening afterwards, I think we can see where this is going, right? It's like a predecessor, right, to NFTs and kind of pointing in that direction. So how eventually did you get to NFTs and did you land there? So I know there was a couple other steps in between of, some digital worlds that you were tinkering with. You want to talk through that, like how you eventually made your way into NFTs?
Sure. So I'm definitely a geek. I mean, I've been gaming since a kid. I was a kid. I was the youngest Magic the Gathering judge, I think, in the world at the time, or at least in South Africa. I got my Magic the Gathering judge award at 12 or something. So I was always involved in stuff like that. And when I stopped working in private banking, I was working from home a lot more. I didn't have to travel as much, and so it was fantastic. Not only could I kind of get Magic the Gathering going on again, and there's a club around the corner, I also started getting into Second Life. And for me, I'm much more of an introvert than an extrovert. I mean, I do okay in conference stuff, but I find them exhausting. And so what was interesting to me about Second Life was there was a growing community of what I would call cosplayers, right? It's instead of think Vampire the Masquerade and all of that stuff that was going on, right? Instead of renting a big mansion or renting a hall to do a Tudor feast and everyone comes dressed up and you go and travel there for cosplay, you basically would take a 66,000 square meter island in Second Life, set it up as that, setting, and then have the same process of people filling out forms and applying and taking on a character and stuff like that. So, I went into Second Life very much for the cosplay aspect. I was well aware that there were, BDSM communities there as well, furry communities, people doing photography. But what really interested me, and Second Life had already passed its heyday, if you will, right? It had gone down from whatever, 250,000 active players to 60,000. It didn't bother me because I was looking for that niche of cosplay. So I ran a community there and was part of numerous communities. But I was part of a very large Game of Thrones community, about 300 active players. And what was interesting was, being a lifelong collector, I couldn't help myself. I started acquiring a lot of digital assets. So, there were a lot of artists that I thought were very talented. They would do these limited edition runs in the form of gachapon. And I just would kind of, if I saw a collection I thought was fabulous, I would end up buying, 100 of them and parking them away, right? Because, storage is so easy in cyberspace. And then some of these people went on to become famous people in Disney and so on. And these collections that I put together for $2.50, I now had 20 of them and I was selling them at, $250 a piece. So I had, a very large, I would say, an inventory of 90,000 items in Second Life. And, there was this real aha moment, because I am quite involved in Buddhist meditation. And there was this real aha moment of wow, I'd been collecting imported Royal Doulton beer mugs since childhood, and they all had to be insured and they were museum quality, and one crack and they lose 50% of their value. And then there's the aspect in fine art and cards and watches of getting them authenticated and all of that. None of that was relevant in Second Life. You could see who the designer was. You didn't have to get it insured. If I went to bed at night, basically all 90,000 items went to bed with me. And so I really started enjoying this digital asset aspect. And I love the idea of kind of, it was Christmas, you suddenly pull out your favorite Christmas tree, and then I've got 20 different collections of Christmas lights and things. And, you would bring your friends over for something like we're doing now, right? Instead of just being here in a chat, we would then also have a kind of physical representation of it, a gamified version of it. And I could pull these beautiful items that I loved out and easy set that up. So that was, what I loved about kind of the collecting and decorative side of metaverse platforms.
Yeah. Okay. So for anybody who's listening, and is just at least partially lost here, right? At least maybe sub 30 years old, I would guess, right? Just for some context, and you haven't heard of Second Life. Second Life came around in 2003. And at the time, at least as I remember it, and you of course have a different perspective, Dylan, but as I remember it, it kind of came out and people were a little bit surprised because it kind of, even though video games existed, didn't quite exist before. And so there was a bit of a split that existed. And I guess the new news to me, in full transparency, I very much remember Second Life coming out. But before we talked earlier, I didn't even realize Second Life still existed, to be honest with you. So it's it's excellent to hear that it does exist. And I guess we'll touch on this a little bit more later too, because I think there's an interesting debate in terms of how that fits into everything, since we've spent a lot of time talking about metaverses, of course, and how to characterize them. So we'll definitely get to that. With that in mind, Dylan, so you had this background, therefore you were perfectly prepared for NFTs at that point, right? It sounds like one other component, one other pillar that was crucial to kind of having you fully ready was also the fact that, you tended to be a bit against centralization, intervention, that side of things, which kind of brought you into the crypto space. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I like money, but I'm that libertarian idealist. For me, if you were to ask me the most upsetting thing that happened in the last couple of years, it wasn't COVID. I'm an introvert. I was okay. It's like, cool, I have to be home. I'm home anyway. For me, the whole Hong Kong situation was like, I didn't want to get out of bed for a week. Because, those are the things that are important to me. Individual sovereignty, free speech, people having the keys to their money. That was really important. And so when I kind of saw the whole 2008 situation and basically all of these regulators coming in with these, very large strokes of their pen, I was deeply moved by all of that was going on. I mean, I had a moment where I told a judge basically to go stuff herself. Because she told me, I had a client up for fraud, and she was going on about, don't I feel responsible? I'm in Israel, don't I have a responsibility to the state and all of that? I said, I do not. I said, I have responsibility to my client, and if you want to hold me in contempt, hold me in contempt. Because your nationalist flags don't supersede people's individual rights. And so these are the kinds of things that were guiding me. And so when I heard about Bitcoin coming out in 2009, 2010, 2011, that whole time period, I was speaking to a lot of my libertarian buddies, some of them who were friendly with McAfee himself, and I was inspired by all of it.
Dylan, for those a bit less familiar, can you just elaborate on the Hong Kong situation a little bit to just tease out what the situation was, what the conflict was that you saw, and kind of what drove you as a result of it?
Sure. So China is this kind of one state, one party communist state with a very strong capitalist hybrid thing going on, but it certainly isn't by any means libertarian, right? I mean, you can have views if you think it's positive or not, but individual rights is not a big deal there. And Hong Kong, since the 1800s, had been this remarkable, almost libertarian free city state. And when it was given over back by the United Kingdom, to China with the kind of one country, two government policies, there was a certain amount of hope that they were going to respect the unique nature of Hong Kong. And the way it basically just got reabsorbed into China was truly horrifying to me, because it showed me that the world was not really going to get involved. Right, the Western powers, I was listening to all the conversations in the House of Lords at the time where they felt, they were doing their mea culpas on how they should have taken it more seriously and they should protest and everything. But ultimately, no one did anything, right? And then when you take that into account that the whole Uyghur situation was going on as well, it just became very clear to me that liberty is something we have to protect. And just a little bit of context, I've also been supporting free private cities, the formation of seasteads. I follow that closely. I speak to these people. And so the Hong Kong situation basically dashed all of my hopes that, people could maybe make micronations and they would be supported. And the realization is that, well, no, if we don't protect the bigger states in existence, these micronations or whatever might just be, absorbed, and no one's going to really do anything about it.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Much appreciated. So, we kind of have the foundation in place at this point, right? Individual rights, elements of community and natural process, things like that. It sounds like we have all the components in place to suggest why you would land in NFTs at the end of the day, right? So what was that first experience like, given the fact that you did own all these Second Life assets, but formally speaking, those weren't NFTs, right? Those were assets that had value, that were tradable, but were pre-NFT world, right? As we know it, at least. So what was your first jump into NFTs? Was it Top Shot like the most of us, or like the majority of us? I'm guessing not. Or which area was it?
So Second Life is probably the most akin to what we expect from NFTs because you could sell out, right? Unlike like World of Warcraft and stuff where you really had to go full black market. Second Life does have its own currency called the Linden dollar. There was for a long period they weren't even doing KYC. There's a whole bunch of funny stories when the exchanges started KYC that people quickly funneled their Bitcoin through Second Life. And so, there was a creator economy. So when I was buying and selling kind of rare things, I was cashing out $500, $600, $700, $800 a month sometimes from Second Life, just, because I was collecting and things. But I was always aware, especially speaking to some of my more active gamer friends and also to people I knew in Second Life, if you violated terms of service, they could take your account. Right. So although it was one step better that I could sell the items and cash out, if my account would have been closed because of a violation of terms of service, all of my items disappear and it's on some server somewhere and that's the end of it. And so I was acutely aware of that. And I think my big aha moment was I was at they have something called Fantasy Fair, which is a event for Relay for Life every year. They raised something like 1.7 million over the last 8 years. And this event gets 20,000 people at it in Second Life over a period of a month. And what was interesting is they end with an auction. And at that auction, they sell kind of one-of-one items. And, a lot of designers who are very well known put items up. And one of the very famous designers, Contraption, put up this one-of-one kind of chapel. And it got $750. And that was like a big deal over there. They were oohing and ahhing. And literally 2 days before, the Beeple piece had sold. So a week before, the Beeple piece had sold for 60 million. And while that auction was going on, I was listening to a podcast with the dude who had bought the Beeple for 60 million. And I just couldn't get my head around. It was like, why is this digital asset only at 750 and this digital asset is 60 million? And I'm kind of started then talking to Christie's and Sotheby's, and they're like, yeah, we have this gallery in Decentraland already. And I just had to dive into this. I knew that, kind of when you put all those pieces together, the fact that it had digital provenance was on the blockchain. We could kind of check that the artist hadn't made extra, and all of that. That was an aha moment. That's why that is so valuable. It's not single. It's not focused on a single kind of game or something. It's an asset on the Ethereum blockchain that has provenance that people can transport to other people. And so I came running into Decentraland, was horrified by the fact of how ugly it was in such a ghost town. And basically, my first big money and involvement was in Upland, which is on the Wax chain.
Very cool. Very, very cool, Dylan. So I want to get to, the kind of next part and meat of our discussion, right? But we're all here. We all buy into the premise, of course, of NFTs and the thought process behind it and the pros and the cons. So I don't want to waste too much of our time there. Instead, what I want to spend our time on is projecting out into the future, because at the current state that we're at right now, we have a macroeconomic climate that's banged up, as we know. We have, last week that happened, right? Which, assuming people are going to be listening later as well, by last week, I'm referring to the whole FTX downfall, in addition to other things that, of course, happened in the past. So we have this burning need for more regulation or oversight or somewhere in between that's going to exist. Also, we know that the space is going to evolve naturally over time. We know there's going to be new use cases, all those good kinds of things. I want to spend our time there in kind of shaping the future and hearing what your thought process is on that. So maybe the first place to start would be excellent, given your background, is you saw the 2008 recession, pretty firsthand from the private banking space. So I guess the question I have for you is, what path do you think is there to right now? Do you think it's very similar to what was happening in 2008? Do you think there are differences? And if so, what differences do you see?
Yeah, I think it's very, as far as kind of recessions go, it's very different, because the 2008 recession was one of a global cascade effect, right? In the words of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, We had weaponized, we had basically used the equivalent of atomic bombs, right? In financial tinkering. We had got to the point now where we had, so many layers of derivatives coupled with, packaging subprime mortgages, which had no ability to be paid back. So there was no confidence in them, coupled with, government programs that had Fannie Mac and Fannie Mae that had promised to insure the product, coupled with banks that had got greedy, that were all part of the fractionized reserve banking process. The level, the kind of, the amount of real money being backed by real assets compared to, how much debt had been issued was on such an astronomical level that literally, we had Iceland going bankrupt and Greece going bankrupt and stuff like that. So when you compare that to the situation now where we've slid into a recession that is based pretty much because of COVID, right? In other words, if you look at the pre-COVID economy, things were pretty damn good. Okay. Yes, we go through recessionary cycles and depressions every so often, but as much as I hate the Keynesians, they were managing to kind of keep things on an even keel. And so, when you look at this kind of recession now, gross productivity is still pretty decent, right? The job market is still pretty decent. You can sense the feeling as well, not in the crypto since the previous bear market, but also in the general world. There is still a consumer confidence, right? People still believe in buying stuff. People still want to spend, go on holidays and things like that. So overall, I would say we're in a much better overall economy. But the one thing that I would say is we've got very used to the massive elephant in the room, which is this extraordinary amount of government debt, right? No other country on earth could have $30+ trillion on the books in debt like America does. They would end up like Argentina. It's just because the dollar is the reserve currency. And if that ever changes, that could cause a massive cascade itself. And whatever the catalyst could be, this could be the catalyst, right? So all in all, no, we're going to be here for a while, but it doesn't feel at all like 2008, 2009.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we've talked with other guests in the past, and projections, there's partially that, there's partially inflation and supply chain related things, right? Supply and demand side issues that exist. We've talked about all, those things as well, right? And I think the projections for most folks are, it's not like things are going to turn around immediately at all, right? We still have a lot that has to be fixed. Balance sheet, like you suggested, interest rates in the US, and that just expands beyond, right? Then Europe has issues, all those good things. But I think the projections are maybe like, call it a year to two out, we start heading in that direction, hence the clickbaity name of the episode today. One other interesting thing, though, that you've spent time on too is, a conference that you went to a little while back, to this IASCO conference also. Can you talk about that experience, the timing, talk about the timing of it in your experience there and how it shaped your perception as well?
Sure. Just on the previous point, I want to add something as well. One of the things that was incredible about the whole 2008 crisis is, although people were talking about it, we were all caught off guard, right? I think that I just remember, being in Manhattan. I was in Manhattan when Bernie Madoff was arrested, and all of that. I remember sitting with Goldman Sachs and everyone. There was such a level of denial and shock and outrage, and no one was coping with it. Whereas what's going on over here is I sometimes coin kind of the Karl Marx situation, whereby it's because Karl Marx wrote his book Das Kapital, focusing on the working class and how they were being mistreated. A lot of modern day historians think that the UK and other places avoided the uprising of the peasants, if you will, because they took the book to heart and started like moving in the right direction. Right, we started kind of the welfare state. Similarly, because we keep saying this word recession and stuff preeminently, you're seeing everyone adjust, right? You're seeing now that Europe has suddenly, because they were so scared of a cold winter, they've now quickly turned their tankers into kind of gas refineries. You've got everyone starting to find out ways to store energy. They're already working out ways to decrease it. And so now they're ahead of their schedule by 2.5 months. Right. And so all of these preemptive things might actually give us much more of a soft landing. Whereas in 2000 and 2009, everything blew up. And now the question was, President Bush, how many banks do you want to collapse overnight, right? That is very, very different too. And so kind of leading on to that, the IOSCO conference, for those who don't know, is not really broadcasted, but it's the most important international regulator conference of the year. And basically they send, you get all of the regulators, like from the SEC for each different country, as well as some of the central bank heads and chairs. And then they often invite a number of big banks. At the one that I was at, Goldman Sachs was one of the key speakers. Stanley Fischer was there at the time. He was actually the equivalent of the Federal Reserve Bank head for Israel. That's how I had got invited. And it was cool to hang with some of these people and talk to them. But at the same time, I was horrified that their reaction was, we need to, aggressively start regulating the hell out of everything. And I thought that was that kind of militant economist approach, that going from the theory to not understanding that what's going to happen from that is basically the big banks will just get bigger, because there are going to be so many barriers and layers of regulation that you're going to kill the entrepreneurial spirit. And I kind of, was saying this to you before when we were chatting. I make a distinction between kind of regulation and oversight, right? The free market often has good ways to do oversight. If you look, for example, at credit ratings, right? Most credit rating scores are done by private companies, right? And when government starts to kind of overzealously start to try to fix things, they often put so much bureaucracy and paperwork in place that they end up destroying all forms of innovation and end up creating these big monopolies that they were meant to try and protect us from anyway.
Yeah, it's a great split, and I appreciate you defining how you split the two of those. So with the current state of NFTs, crypto, right, which kind of merged to some extent, right? What, in your opinion, is what's needed? And then separate from that, which may not be the same thing, what do you think is likely to happen?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I don't usually find myself like angry, but man, was I furious when the whole FTX thing happened. I mean, the more the stories were coming out about the incestuous nature and how much these people have paid, the Republicans and the Democrats, and how they were kind of already talking to the SEC and stuff. I was furious because, this is we're now having this discussion about crypto being out of control, and yet this crisis that just happened with FTX is a Web 2 problem. I mean, Satoshi Nakamoto made crypto to avoid this kind of bullshit, right? In other words, if you just change the name from FTX to Robinhood and make the product not a cryptocurrency, but a stock, then it would just be, again, Robinhood's fine, but it would be a brokerage firm that was violating all the laws that are existing already and committing fraud. And what happened over here was, you had this passive aggressive SEC and Commodities Exchange Commissions who were kept fighting over who should have control of the space. And what happened is they ended up neither of them really looking into what was going on. And so you had, and then you also had the Bahamian Authority, and that's no joke either. After 2008, they took very seriously the role of staying on the good graces of America and the UK. And so they were meant to be watching this too. And so that this kind of awkward, socially awkward, not even charismatic guy, I mean, Bernie Madoff was as charismatic as they came, that he could pull off this kind of shtick whereby, he had all the control and was committing fraud and with his own coins is it's insane and infuriating. And when people say, "Oh, we need more regulation," this could have been stopped with the current laws already on the books. But that aside, what I think we need right now is, and I'll say also what I hope will happen as well. We need a progressive view on crypto, not a regressive. In other words, I think Coinbase said it so well. When the SEC said we're coming to do an investigation on Coinbase tweeted out, we've tried to have a conversation with you now for 5-6 years. You basically told us we don't exist, and now suddenly you want to go on your first date with us and take us to court, right? That is a very aggressive, pandering behavior. A progressive approach would be to say, look, we've failed the space. We ignored you. We didn't give you the guidelines. We're going to open a special bureau that is going to be your point of contact that will tell you how you can check if your coin is a security, and if it is, what you should do. We're going to grant kind of a amnesty if you come forward so that you don't, have to pay penalties and fines and criminal this and that. And we're going to be there to help, bridge you over to the mainstream finance as an alternative finance. And I think that given the size of Web3 now, and the interest of institutions to be in Web3, right? I mean, the good news that, has almost gone under the radar because of all this mess is Fidelity coming in, and unlike Robinhood, where the average person account is $5,000, the average account on Fidelity is $200,000, right? These are the serious big guns. These are the people that represent pensions, family offices and stuff. And so, when they now start to do any forms of regulations, they know that they could cause a cascade in traditional finance, right? Like, let's take USDC for an example. If they suddenly say overnight, everyone has to do a KYC, we could see DAI unpeg from its peg, right? And that could cause a massive cascade in traditional finance. And so given we're in a recession, depression, whatever, couple that with another atomic bomb going off in Web3, causing all the margin calls for these institutions, they know that by attacking us aggressively, they could cause themselves serious harm in the traditional finance. And so I'm hoping that they will come at this with a progressive approach, with an amnesty approach. And, but there are signs of people still pandering. I mean, until this week, Gary Gensler suddenly has a softer tone, but until this week, he's been very aggressive. And the most infuriating has been the EU. I mean, one of the central bank commissions said, well, it's not our fault. We can't deal with these animals. They're impossible to deal with these animals. I mean, that's what he called the space. He called traders and exchanges over here animals. And if that's the wording, that's not a partner we want to deal with. So I hope that it's not that's just pandering, but when it actually comes to laws and stuff, they will be a bit more in the spirit of partnership.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky situation, right? I mean, it's like part optics, right? Of they want to be perceived by their followers, voters, whomever, right? That they're anti this thing that other people perceive to be negative in some cases. On top of it, even if that weren't an issue, governments are never known for having tons of extra bandwidth and getting ahead of the curve on things, right? So that's not exactly, maybe not even operationally feasible, let alone something they want to do. So I get where you're saying it's a loaded, tricky, and separate question of is it even possible, given how things are set up. Malik, and by the way, welcome, Malik, new MVHQ member, stepping up and jumping right in. So welcome, first and foremost, really, really great. It poses a counter question, which is, while oversight and self-governance is great, without regulatory bodies, doesn't 2008 repeat itself? Agencies equally complicit in ignoring what was inside the CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, so that they won't lose the business.
Great.
What is your reaction to that balance? Let's say.
Great question. Yeah, because in fact, one of the things that was the failure of the 2008 situation was that Standard & Poor's and Moody's ratings were biased. And the reason they were biased is because the compensation was coming from the people they were rating, right? And that is the key point over here. I'm very into health. And, one of the things when I look at kind of medical reports, or I'm listening to a podcast on a medical report, it's like, who sponsored the report, right? So if it's a sugar report sponsored by the candy industry, I'm not going to take it seriously, right? And I think that is the key thing. We need to check which of the agencies, if we are saying that the oversight is coming from independent corporations, we must check if they've got a vested interest or if their compensation is coming from the people that they are doing reports for, which is fine, but we need to know that, right? A good example is the influencers in the space, right? I have no problem with people shilling. I just want to know that they're getting compensated for it, right? Because that will affect how seriously I take, what they're saying.
Makes sense. As somebody who lives outside the U.S., right? In Jerusalem, like you suggested, a lot of this market, of course, does skew in the direction of the U.S. Do you think that's really what the situation is in terms of governance oversight, that it's going to be the U.S. that directs it? Do you think there's extra complexity because, crypto and NFTs are a global thing, and all of a sudden you have different approaching this in a different way, and that could present an issue? How do you think about that?
The US and the UK are the key players when it comes to the financial markets. It's not changing anytime soon. As long as the dollar hegemony maintains itself, it all starts with you. I'll ask you an interesting trivia question. What is the best offshore banking jurisdiction in the world? What is the best offshore? Let's ask it like that. I mean, there's a caveat, but guess what it is.
We have answers coming from the audience. I would guess Caymans or Switzerland at some point, but I'm assuming it's something else that you have in mind.
No, the answer is actually New York, as long as you're not American. If you are not American, if you're a Saudi sheikh or something, this is why I said to you I was back and forth to New York. For any of my non-American clients, we opened accounts with them with JP Morgan, because America pointed all the guns at everyone else, went to Switzerland, went to Singapore, went to all of them and said, you've been very, very naughty. And now we need you to do K9s and W8s and all of these self-declarations and stuff. But when everyone came to America and said, cool, will you reciprocate? They said, oh, no, national security. We can't do that. So you had America acting as a black box to most of these smaller countries, but America was getting all the intel from everyone else. I mean, Israel had a huge spat over this with America. It was quite funny because you've got a lot of ex living in Israel. All of your books, right? Because, accounts and was too difficult to do that. We're going to hold you all in contempt because it's a national security violation, because all the, we can't have them seeing what's going on with our money movements. And so all of the Israeli banks promptly sent out letters that said, if you are not permanently resident in Israel, we are giving you 60-day notice, we're closing your accounts.
Interesting. Yeah, totally makes sense. And I get the vantage point of what you're saying. And I'm always cautious of that as well, right? Of not having an ethnocentric view. The whole premise of this is that it's global, right? The assets are global, but at the same time, I still think what you're saying is true. And it hinges on New York and I guess, or the US and I guess the UK as well. That makes total sense. So
yeah, because London is basically the control point of all the offshore jurisdictions. I could talk about this for ages. I'm a history nut. But essentially, when Her Majesty's empire collapsed, all these financiers said, well, what the hell are we going to do with all of our colonies? We've got all these colonies. What the hell do we do with all of them? And they basically all turned into banking and trust centers. So London remained the central point for all offshore banking and finance for Europe and the Middle East. And America is America. I mean, America's the superpower, dollar hegemony, right? The US dollar became the reserve currency once we went off the gold standard. The US dollar became the petrodollar as well. And so that those two places together are controlled the financial markets.
Yep, makes total sense. I want to be mindful of time because we still have a couple topics that we're going to be covering here. So somehow we're going to have a soft landing and transition into metaverses, because that's definitely a category that is on everyone's minds. And I still think there's this floating question that exists within the NFT world of all of these disparate metaverses and what's potentially going to win and how to even think about that, right? So, with your experience that you had with Second Life, is there a chance that Second Life Is the metaverse wanting the metaverse race eventually that kind of blindsides everyone, since there are so many active users? It's so much more built out and robust. It's been around for 20 years. Is there something else that's standing out to you as a leading metaverse? How do you think that race goes?
Yeah, it's a good question, because Second Life itself had numerous competitors over the years that kind of all disappeared, because the key thing when it comes to, again, I make this distinction for games and metaverses as games as those which have a central activity or goal that you're trying to do, versus a metaverse platform, which is to me primarily a social platform, right? It's more akin to Instagram and Facebook, where you're going there for a social experience, just you have the added setup of having a visual or avatar presence, right? And again, I just want to cut off the fluff over here of augmented reality and virtual reality, because that's levels of immersion, in my opinion, right? Second Life is a metaverse in existence. It's just on a flat screen, as opposed to being highly immersive like Ready Player One. And I think those are going to come. But I think, I consider Second Life to be the initial metaverse of kind of foray. And then we had a period 5 years ago where a number of groups started forming, trying to get into virtual VR. Meta being the latest of it. But even Second Life itself had a sister that they spun off called Sunzar that was visually beautiful. And no one wanted to play because no one really had an interest in these heavy Oculus headsets yet. And so now the pivot in the new, what I call the metaverse renaissance, right? Because that's what has been happening since Decentraland and all this money coming in and all this media press, is that all of those who are building now understand that virtual reality and augmented reality is the add-on. You need to make a Second Life 2.0, which is better visual fidelity, better user experience, much easier UI. And of course, the holy grail is the combination of good graphics plus tons of people in a single space. That's why when I saw the other side demo, the part that got me contacting all of my media friends and people that had been reporting on Second Life and Sunzar and High Fidelity and VR Chat for years was like, holy shit, it only took $200 million to solve the problem of how many people can you get into a single instance, right? That was the key, because then you can have a continuous world, right? The appeal of Second Life was the continuous world, right? When you look at something like NFT worlds, it's almost its own game. It's its private island. The amazing part of Second Life is it was more akin to Twitter. You could be, if you had your estate or home on one of the big major continents, people could literally ride up in a horse, right? They could see on the map that there's 10 people over there. People would come over all the time and say, hi guys, who are you? My name's so-and-so. And that public square aspect is the part that is so exciting to me. So I just want to say, on a comment on Second Life was started long before its time. It was almost so out of the box that it pissed people off. There was an article in Time magazine at the time that there are 8 millionaires in Second Life. And that's when everyone started arriving. The first people that actually come into America, to Second Life, as a trivia fact, in 2003 was actually the military. The US military was the biggest client because they wanted to create kind of obstacle course to train people for combat. I've spoken to a couple of generals over there who stayed on and they love it. But then what happened was you had this gold rush period like you had with Decentraland, where all these big brands and embassies wanted to open kind of virtual places in Second Life. And what happened was all the media attention brought out all the ugly as well. Number one, there had been a massive bank run scandal. There were like private banks in Second Life that were all Ponzi schemes or imploded. You had that situation. Then you had the whole unregulated gambling, which was massive, and everyone started getting upset with that. Again, you're seeing the repeats over here, right? And then the part that was the nail in the coffin for them was, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending what angle you want to take, unfortunately, when there's a gamified dating experience, in come the furries, and in come people exploring their sexual identity. And Germany was the one that nailed the coffin for Second Life on like a big level, because Germany put out a number of articles and then started a whole investigation into pedophilia. In other words, people kept showing them images of ogres fucking fairies, to be crude. And they said, look, this is all pedophilia and we're encouraging pedophilia. And this was back in 2005, right? The world has changed drastically since then. But unfortunately, that's what turned Second Life into, 1 million active players a day down to 80,000 active players a day. And all these kind of articles of Second Life is dead. And now, if you're asking me why Second Life won't be the one that would just add Web3 technology, because I know a lot of people have said, well, why don't just games take it on? Firstly, they don't want to upset their user base. But secondly, you have to understand Second Life and Roblox, unfortunately, are built on their own engines. And there's nothing they can do about it, right? So Second Life, to me, I've said this often to my friends over there, although graphically it's using all the best graphics, it's held together by duct tape, right? The best thing they can do is keep running updates and stuff, but it's a clunky UI. And they can't really pivot from that, because if they had to pivot from that, you would lose all of your inventory. And so it very much resembles, a retirement home. They've got, your average user over there has been there 7+ years. They love it. They still use it all the time. It's their social thing. I've gone to a Christmas event, a Yule Ball, that has been going on for 14 years. I've been going to it every year for 7 years. I pop in to see some old friends. And then there happens to have been during COVID a bit of a renaissance in Second Life too, because you had a whole group of kind of 16 to 25-year-olds that were coming in to do cosplay. But yeah, I do not think Second Life, will be it, but I think we can keep visiting it and learning from what they're doing, because I think Second Life and by extension Roblox, I think Roblox solved all the problems that Second Life fell into, right? Like with PG stuff and separating NSFW stuff and stuff like that. So those are the two that we want to look at when we're now building the one that's going to include, the blockchain.
It's interesting. I mean, it makes sense what you're saying and all the barriers that exist. Also, though, notwithstanding all the issues, they have 20 years of institutional knowledge at this point, right? That you only have 2 years of knowledge for, right? Not that you can't ramp up fast, and they also have a user base, right? A ginormous user base and people even beyond that, but they have a ton of institutional knowledge. So I feel like it's a player that is not, I certainly hadn't spent time considering as like a possible entrance into this, even if they're not going to migrate their existing base for the reasons you said. There's no reason why they wouldn't have the ability to expand and create a new world, right? Using the same knowledge and expertise they have that many others don't have too, or do a joint venture or something to be able to help that as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. They tried. They made Sanzar, and it was too ahead of its time. It was like VR world. It was focused on virtual reality. What has happened, though, is over the years, the founders of Second Life or people that worked at Second Life have it's like the Enron example. They've kind of gone everywhere. A lot of the original top employees at at Facebook were headhunted from Second Life. Part of the demise of Second Life was Facebook opened, in like 2006 or something. We have to check exactly. But, people stopped saying, like a lot of people said, would say, what's the point of Second Life, right? When Second Life came out, they got the point. It was like a gamified social experience. But once you had the big social platforms, people literally started saying like, I don't get it. Let's either chat on Facebook or let's go and grab a real life coffee, right? There was like, it was too confusing what Second Life was supposed to fulfill until you try it. The amazing thing is when I took people into Second Life, if they spend a bit of time there, they have this aha moment. Okay, I get it. It does spur emotion. It does feel immersive. It does. And so, but yes, to your point, a lot of the execs and original founders and stuff have migrated over to other places. And another thing that hurt Second Life is it was very communist, socialist, communist, whatever. And they took a very weird approach to property rights and to IP. And so a lot of top artists over the years also migrated away and went to work for other gaming companies and stuff like that. I still know some artists in Second Life, who make $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month and sell, a chair for 25 cents. But are doing such volume. But yes, I think what you're going to find is the user base is as aggressive as the gaming community. They and it's not just to NFTs. They're aggressive to anything that is in Second Life. This is their home. I sometimes can coax them out with the, you don't have to give up Second Life. Why don't you also try this? And so I've done some screen sharing with them too, and taken them on journeys. But for the most part, the user base wants their retirement home and they want to stay there. But yes, the intel is pouring over. A lot of the execs are being, I think even for other side as well, are being pulled over from Minecraft and from Roblox and from Second Life.
What's interesting also, Dylan, is for anybody that wasn't around at that time, like I also remember one big difference too is, at least from my perspective, there was a pretty big stigma with Second Life as well. Like we weren't in the world yet where ginormous games, multiplayer games, like all these things kind of existed. Earn capacity, all that, like all these various things, interactive games, etc. So I remember there being a pretty big stigma for Second Life too, such that like that next group might have considered it not there yet necessarily. Whereas right now with games and people being comfortable, it's become more of a mass thing. There's obviously gaming teams that exist, esports, those kinds of teams. Obviously a lot of, celebs are in that space. So I feel like that's one benefit currently in terms of getting more people into metaverses, is that it's become at least a little bit destigmatized compared to what Second Life was when it came out and the response that I thought I remember it having.
100%. It was really beyond it. It was really, 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 really beyond too soon. And especially once you took away the gambling aspect, right? Because, gambling, gaming, and sex, is the internet of the 2000s and 2010s. I mean, you can argue it still is, but especially then. And so once they started kind of, like trying to downplay the sexual side, like, because again, people came there for sexual exploration, right? This was for a lot of countries before gay rights, right? So a lot of people were coming there anonymous, exploring, and Second Life had a massively powerful anonymous culture. And a lot of kind of those kinds of groups where we would talk to. Also, people with disabilities were using Second Life en masse. And I don't just mean, mental disabilities. I mean, people who had any kind of impairments, right? One of the famous designers in Second Life was a person who suddenly got, cerebral palsy, and she had a big fashion career. And so this was a way for her to continue that. Then you had the aspect of gambling taking away. So people were like, well, what do I do in Second Life? And Second was like, well, you do whatever you want. But there was no kind of like game for them to do. And then, as you say, these big, MMORPGs were just starting to get off. So I think Second Life really did suffer from being too early, much like, Google Glasses and even virtual reality. I think we all want virtual reality, but we're not happy with its current package, right? Most people are like, I don't want it if I have to have an Oculus and the barriers of entry and the costs and all of that. So yes, I think that this is why I call it a metaverse renaissance. This is good timing. The combination of the blockchain, people's understanding of games and stuff like that, and the incredible amount of money. And I can't stress this enough. Second Life stayed almost stagnant because there was, no VCs wanted to invest in a better metaverse platform and stuff like that. Roblox was a challenge to get off the ground, and they've done very well, but they also had to build a custom engine. But when you couple the fact now of how much money is in crypto, the interest again in metaverse platforms, and the technological advancements, how we can get lots of people in the same space. And I want to give a shout out to Unreal Engine 5 because, I, for those who are not who have never dabbled in Blender and stuff like that, it's incredible. It's truly like movies are being made on Unreal Engine 5, right? It's got this dynamic lighting. It optimizes so you can get, designers can spend their time building in Blender, Maya, ZBrush. These 3D creating tools are 1,000 times better than they were in the early 2000s. So all of the building blocks are here to make a really immersive metaverse platform, even if it doesn't yet have VR, right? Like most people, when they play modern games today, are blown away by how much lighting is dynamic, and the AI involved, and the beautiful kind of high fidelity visuals. So yeah, that's changed drastically.
Yeah. So I just want to be mindful of time because I think we're about up on time, and we have even more events behind this. But one last question, maybe to hit you with, just always curious to hear from different vantage points. And maybe it's what we were just talking about. But as a fan person, what are you most excited about in Web3 in the near future?
I would say play and own games. I don't say play and earn. I think the owning aspect is the missing part for gamers and guilds. But I would say metaverse platforms. I'm really, really excited for other side. Like, I am not only kind of investing in the space, I am the end user. I mean, I have been waiting for a Second Life 2.0 for a long time. And so, to see them using Unreal Engine 5, which I've been following closely for the last 3 years, and to see, what creators are now able to produce. And again, the fact, for me, the most eye-opening part of the demos was how many people they could get into a single place, because that is the holy grail that we've all been trying to solve for so long. That's I would say other side has me extremely excited. And then a couple of kind of the play and own games, right? Whether it ends up being the current iterations of Galo, Illuvium, doesn't matter, or Unreal Engine, or Epic comes in with their own game. I think that aspect of property rights in Web3, I mean, it's not just games, property rights in general, right? Art as well, and digital provenance, knowing the whole story and tracking, who produced an item and who's owned it and how many exist. I think, the property rights aspect of Web3 for digital assets is, really, really exciting to me.
Malik, I think you got your unintentional answer there for whatever it's worth. That actually perfectly tied to your question of, sounds like VR/AR, obviously ideal, and most people want it. Maybe not absolutely necessary in the beginning. Maybe it's a phase 2 thing that exists. Sounds like there's enough excitement, technology, all those pieces coming together to be able to win people over in mass. And as you heard from Dylan, other side, maybe some other emerging platforms seem to be what Dylan's excited about, at least. I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm only excited about other side. I've spent all of half an hour in Decentraland. I was horrified by it. I mean, that was Second Life in 2011. And I am, I've said this, people, as much as I say I'm a decentralized maxi, when it comes to, owning your coins and people having their own money, that I do not say that when it comes to people producing good products, right? When it comes to a game or a platform, I want centralized governance with decentralized ownership. All I want is that my violation of terms of service does not allow you to then seize my property, right? If you take the risky decision of banning a guild, which is your right, okay, you're a private company, you need to suffer the economical consequences that we are then going to go and take our assets and dump them on the market, right? That's how we keep each other kosher, we keep each other honest. And so that's the part I want, but I don't want these, Decentraland or Webiverse and stuff. I think it's going to be, the user experience is the most important part to me when it comes to a game. And I don't care how cool the code is on the back end. If you make a shitty game, an ugly platform, and you fail to get critical mass of users, I ain't going to support you just because you cover my ideals.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think a lot of people would agree with you. So really, really awesome discussion today. Dylan, appreciate you coming on and coming with guns loaded or ammo loaded to be able to hit on all these topics. I really, really appreciate you. Everyone in the audience listening live, always appreciate your interaction, questions, especially the new folks coming on. Really appreciate that too. Next week in the US is Thanksgiving week, just as a reminder. So we'll actually be off for Numbers Therapy next week, and we'll be back the week after that. Hopefully not too much will have changed within the world when we come back to Numbers Therapy, but I'm sure it will. Really looking forward to seeing everybody in a couple of weeks, and everyone have an absolutely fantastic Thanksgiving. And thanks so much, as always, for your support. See everyone in VC1.